to a Shamanic experience. I'm Katie Weatherup, shamanic practitioner and solo traveler. If you believe mountains hold ancient wisdom and rivers cleanse, you're in the right place. Let's explore the energy and magic of places near and far, and I'll share practical travel tips along the way, one sacred location at a time. One of my really rich travel experiences was getting to visit the British Museum. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the complexity of the British Museum. You know, it really is a enormous building filled with things that were appropriated non-consensually from cultures that were being colonized and pillaged and brought back and curated and put on display. And the descendants of those whose cool stuff was pillaged have asked in no uncertain terms for it back. And in some cases, a tiny token amount has been returned. But for the most part, the British Museum is pretty interested in keeping what it has, gathered from the far reaches. Some of it in more ethical ways, but a number of things not so much. And they have really good branding, a museum of the world for the world, and they don't charge admission, which I think is a graceful gesture. You can just get in line and walk right in and have an experience. That being said, many people wanting to visit the, beautiful artifacts of their ancestors are not in a position to, get on a plane and travel to the wildly expensive London. So I fully acknowledge all of that, and given that this is the reality at this time of how things are organized, I still had an incredibly rich and very energetically activated experience of getting to see all of these magnificent things. And it was a trip. One of the things of 2020 hindsight is I wish I'd kind of structured my timing to go to the British Museum for the first time over a couple of days for shorter increments, because there's so much there that has such potent energy. And one of the things that was consensually on loan, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, was one of the big heads from Easter Island. And I don't feel super called to travel to Easter Island. It's, definitely a complicated place to get to. But the energy coming off of that was absolutely massive. It was really, really intense and potent. And some of the Egyptian statues, I wasn't as enamored with the mummies, but the Egyptian statues were very, very potent, as well as just so many other things. And in true Katie fashion, I'm mellowing a little bit with age, but at the time, I really wanted to see all the things. And so I spent probably about 4 hours just, trying to cover every single gallery and every single exhibit. When I was about 16, my parents took my sister and I to the Smithsonian, and they wisely did, one section. And my sister and I just tried to cover like everything at practically a run. And the upshot is I remember very little of the visit back then. But for the British Museum, it was really interesting and magnificent and potent to see and experience and be able to be adjacent to so many different objects of power, of very, very genuine energetic magic and power. A lot of them were created for ceremonial purposes. And one of the things I think is really interesting that I've noticed kind of accumulating different experiences is there's a very different energy that comes off of an object that was for ceremonial purposes as opposed to an object that was kind of an everyday part of the world. It was pretty, we made something beautiful kind of object. And I don't even necessarily know that intent of it being the sacred is something that's held by the artisan or imbued because of the meaning that other people have when they look upon it. But I really have observed a significant difference in the experience. But for the British Museum, one of the things that was really interesting about that was collecting so many really potent energetic experiences, one after another, I was unpacking it in my dreams for weeks. I was having these really vivid shamanic dreams that I didn't necessarily remember when I woke up, but it was just sort of unpacking all of these energies and all of these connections. So it's an interesting thing to see potent objects that have an enormous energy activation and transmission. I think it's worth noting that all of us would walk into the British Museum if we chose to go there with different past life history. And so what lights up for us would be very diverse, as well as different magical traditions. So one of the really cool things about shamanic journey is you can journey to form a relationship with different archetypes. And it's useful to remember that this is the archetype that's showing up for you in a particular way. It's not everyone's archetype. I think that part of the power of shamanism is deep personal truth rather than objective truth. And I think that's a very useful thing to keep in mind kind of across the board. One of my most charming memories, I went back and got to finally return to the British Museum because discombobulating as it was, I loved it to pieces, just absolutely adored all of those experiences. But I wanted to go back, and having another experience, even covering a fair bit of ground, but having seen and been present with a number of the objects already was much more manageable. Of course, the whole development of my energetic matrix of all the years that had gone by, I'm sure contributed as well. But I went with one of my favorite shamanic practitioners in the world, Kay Gillard, and she's based in Glastonbury. And bless her heart, she came up to London to see me as I was, between travel experiences. I had a brief layover in London. But she has a really potent relationship to Hecate. And so we're walking, and there's all this beautiful Greek stuff. And then she comes to this little tiny statue, and it's quite small, and it certainly has a nice potent energy. But I just watched her energy blossom open because she has this profound connection to this particular goddess. And so this ancient sacred object combined with her deep relationship with this just lit up all this magic and energy. And I was standing next to her, and I'm like, oh wow, that is impressive. That is a lot of energy. So it's kind of worth noting in a place like that has so much diversity of experiences, how different things can really light up for different people. So there may be things that you're like, oh, that's beautiful. I really appreciate the beauty. And there may be other things where you're like, I don't even know why I can't stop staring at this, carved piece of granite that, has something where I have literally no context for it. But it's interesting, just to note. So I have no regrets about my, kind of scooping up way more than I could digest as far as energetic experiences and impressions, and the fact that it took me a while in my sleep to kind of unpack so many transmissions and energetic experiences so close together. Like I said, if I had it to do over again, I would probably space out the experiences from, go for a few hours on one day or an hour on one day, and, kind of have a shorter but more frequent visit if that was something that I could work out logistically. But even with some feelings of complexity about harm perpetrated and the, concepts of fairness and colonialization being a not cool thing and all of that, I still just really cherish the depth of experience I got to have of getting to be with all of these really potent sacred objects in this location for places that I probably won't get to. They're places that traveling as a solo woman traveler is probably not the most aligned thing, and the complexity of the contemporary culture is more than necessarily I want to deal with. And who knows how things will unfold, but it was a very precious and treasured life experience that I got to just be free to wander and be mesmerized by these things and feel how they lit up different parts of my energy field and receive transmissions that I wasn't even aware of that awoke and activated things as I went through this. So complexities aside, I really would recommend the British Museum for anyone who that would align for. I totally honor that we all have these different balances for our ethics and our principles and the experiences that we want to have and what opens up. And I tend not to be extreme in terms of different things. But for me, there was a lot of richness, and it's a really different experience to go through a museum as someone who has energetic sensitivity and senses that are awake and parts of oneself that are going to receive activations and transmissions and downloads with these very potent objects. And that's just a different quality of experience than it would be for someone who doesn't have those pathways open and isn't as attuned to them. So it's a nice thing to consider and tune into if you have the opportunity to be in the presence of really potent sacred objects. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.